The other thing that I think that the Confederacy needs to be recognized for is that they have been the springboard for a number of other communities and band councils, for instance, taking the different actions that the Confederacy has taken and creating their own systems based on that. The whole application process was repeated by every single band council all across southern Ontario. The monitoring programs are being duplicated by the band councils. And so what you have is the Confederacy, again, taking the lead and demonstrating the responsibility as Haudenosaunee out there and making sure that our lands and our resources are being protected. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the development projects we've been engaged with. And as I've said earlier, we've talked with Samsung, we've talked to Capital Power, we've got negotiations with First Solar, Nextera, and a few of the smaller companies like Silver Creek Solar. But I think that we need to talk a little bit about some of the difficulties that we've experienced, because that's also a big issue for the Haudenosaunee and that we continue to experience. Part of it as a result of, I would say, it's kind of like double talking from some of the current ministries. One of the successes of Confederacy is that they were able to get themselves placed on a list of the Ministry of Environment that says you have to engage with the Confederacy under Section 35909 regs of the when it deals with renewable energies. So they made that step to recognize the Confederacy in dealing with some of these engagement things. As a result of that, then the developers are coming. The difficulty that we face, though, is that developers don't understand the history of the Six Nations. They don't understand the history of the Haudenosaunee, the elected council, and a lot of those things. And what we experienced, particularly with Samsung, was they wanted they want the band, they want the Confederacy all at the same table. We even hear from some of our community members, for example, that want to see a united voice. And it's not to say that either the band or the Confederacy is refusing to deal with them things, but I think you have to understand the history to the point of knowing why that exists and why it's difficult for the Confederacy to look at engagement when it's talking about treaties and talking about land rights, and to give that authority over to the Band Council to do, because it doesn't exist within the Indian Act. And I think that if the Band Council and the Confederacy were to utilize the two-row and understanding where those laws lie, then you'd have an opportunity to see a united front, because the Band Council then would recognize that the Indian Act is its source and utilize that to help support the Six Nations and to deal with some of these ongoing issues that it can deal with in the Indian Act side of things. The Confederacy on this hand, over on the other side of the wampum, has the treaties, it has the land rights, it has the responsibility as set out by the peacemaker through the Guyana-Lagroa, through that Great Law, and through the structure of the Haudenosaunee, the Lodioniso, that Confederacy Chiefs Council, the Wisneoinjage, the Five Nations. And so because it's so ingrained within the Confederacy, you can't just set that aside. You cannot take thousands of years of understanding of who we are as Haudenosaunee people and then compromise those principles and values and say, but okay, we're going to follow the Indian Act today, or okay, we're going to let the Indian Act represent us, because it doesn't work that way. And I think that's the difficulty a lot of people have in understanding who we are as Haudenosaunee and why some of the things that are being done and the decisions that are being made by Chiefs Council right now have to always be about who we are as Haudenosaunee. One of our most recent experiences, for example, and it's very fresh in my mind today, was we had a developer come to us and say, well, the Band Council or because I'm a white person and the Band Council system is something that I recognize, I'm just going to deal with them, and I believe that they're going to represent the interests of the Six Nations. And so the Confederacy, the chiefs and clan mothers that were present at that meeting really had to assist this developer with an understanding of why that statement is just very incorrect. And I think that, you know, they went into some of the discussions around the voting and how the voting system really doesn't reflect the voice of this community because it represents less than 5%. But they also went in to talk about the history of our people, and that's more important. Understanding the history of the Haudenosaunee, not just here at Grand River, but right from the beginning of creation. And bringing that forward, understanding the 1701, understanding the Haldimand, understanding that all of those things that have happened to us historically are just simple little layers on top of a layer of what we understand as Turtle Island. And that the responsibility given to the Confederacy from Sangwayatdiso through the peacemaker goes right back to creation. And so you can't just take a few thousand years to bring us up to here, 1784, where the Haldimand Proclamation comes in, or 1924, where the Indian Act Band Council comes in, and wipe away the rest of it and expect us to sit there and say, oh, okay, we're going to let this discussion happen that way. It doesn't work that way. And we've really had to engage with not only the developers, but also the ministries as well. Most recently, we had a request by an Ontario Power Generation Company to have a presentation on what is Haudenosaunee, who is Haudenosaunee. And we had probably at least 14 or 15 people from Ontario Power Generation that came, and we did a full day presentation. We had people like Rick Hill, who came and presented on the wampums. We had a PowerPoint presentation that went through those layers that I was just talking about, that from the beginning of creation to where we are today. We had someone from the Joint Stewardship Board talk about the relationship between the Confederacy and the City of Hamilton and how engagement can occur. We talked about HDI. We had other speakers that just talked about things that the history of, and we had the chiefs that talked about the history of the Confederacy Council. And so it was a really big educational opportunity for Ontario Power Generation, and they went away with a very different understanding of why when they want to engage with Six Nations, it's not simply a matter of just dealing with the Band Council. And I think that's what's really important as well, because developers need to understand, and the ministry needs to step up to the plate more, and recognizing that while the Six Nations Band Council does represent its voters, it does not represent the Haudenosaunee, and it does not represent the majority of Six Nations people, and it's not okay to allow that process to continue in a way where the majority of our people's voice is not being heard.